climb aboard a Sherman tank and charge straight through the battlefields of World War II. Not to fight, but to steal $16 million in gold. In a place where people are willing to die for ideals, Kelly and his crew risk their lives for one thing alone: money. Sounds insane, but that's not just a story on screen. What few people know is this. What happened behind the film was even crazier. A real country still bleeding from war was used as the backdrop. The iconic character Oddball didn't even exist in the original script. And most shocking of all, actor Donald Sutherland fell into a clinical death state right on set for a brutal reason. So let's set aside noble ideals about duty and country for a moment and uncover 20 gritty secrets of Kelly's Heroes 1970. 20. A film set built on wounds that hadn't healed. Watching it today, we're used to seeing European settings carefully recreated in London or Hollywood, clean controlled and safe. But for Kelly's Heroes, the crew chose a far rougher path. They didn't go for artificiality, they went to Yugoslavia in 1969, a land where the breath of World War II still lingered in every rock crevice, every street corner of Šibenik and the Croatian coast. Director Brian G. Hutton understood that to tell a story about a band of rogue soldiers, he needed a setting just as crazy. Hollywood couldn't replicate ancient villages that hadn't been cleaned up for cameras where bullet holes in the walls weren't painted on by set designers. The cooperation of the Yugoslav People's Army became a logistical goldmine no studio could match. They didn't just lend locations, they lent the very soul of a war that had only just passed. That raw, sun-scorched, suffocating realism in every frame didn't come from lighting techniques. It came from the fact that the cast was literally standing on ground where real blood had been spilled. The local extras weren't just actors, they were survivors of wartime devastation. When the cameras rolled, the collision between painful history and cinematic present turned the film into a haunting negative of reality itself. 19. Oddball, the rebellion of a hippie out of time.
He got decapitated by an 88 about 6 weeks ago. But I mean, don't say you're sorry. He's been trying to get us killed. Ever since we landed at Omaha Beach, it's terrible.
Have you ever felt like Oddball, the eccentric tank commander played by Donald Sutherland? Doesn't quite belong in this movie, yet without him, the film would lose all its life. In the original script, the character was restrained, rigid, and strictly military. But Sutherland, with the soul of a rebel, decided to stage a quiet revolution right on set. He transformed Oddball into a time traveller. A 1970s hippie dropped into the grim heart of World War II. The studio initially frowned at this tonal clash, but director Hutton took a gamble on Sutherland's madness. The result? Every time Oddball appeared with his spaced-out stare and lines about positive waves, the entire crew struggled not to laugh during filming. His surreal energy cut through the grey gloom of war like a live wire. Looking back, Oddball wasn't just a role, it was a spontaneous breakthrough that saved the film's tone. That floating humour and carefree attitude turned Kelly's Heroes from a standard war action film into something far more subversive. 18. Clint Eastwood, the quiet leader behind the camera.
What's happening? They're dropping artillery all over the place. That's what's happening. Where's Big Joe? Over.
He's not here. He's pinned down under the bridge. Over.
Well, get him for me. Over.
I often remember Clint Eastwood as the cold-eyed cowboy, or the lone gunslinger, a Hollywood icon glowing under studio lights. But on the harsh set in Yugoslavia, there was no glamorous star, just a hard-working man wrestling with mud and terrain. The rugged roads of Croatia tested Eastwood's patience in ways no script could describe. When equipment got stuck on steep slopes, or vehicles broke down in the middle of nowhere instead of retreating to a luxury trailer, Eastwood did something that earned everyone's respect. He stepped down, rolled up his sleeves and helped the crew haul heavy equipment across brutal terrain. His quiet endurance became an anchor that kept the entire crew from being swept away by frustration and exhaustion. He didn't rally people with speeches, he led through action. There's a strange sense of nostalgia when watching Kelly lead his men on screen because we know that calm, steady presence wasn't entirely acting. It was a reflection of who Eastwood really was. Once the cameras stopped rolling, a man who refused to shy away from hardship to see the project through. 17. The gold and the perfect disguise for freedom. Have you ever wondered why, in the middle of a brutal war where lives are as cheap as dust, audiences become so captivated by a group of soldiers planning a heist? In many people's memory, Kelly's Heroes is a thrilling robbery film. But if you only focus on the glittering gold bars you've fallen into, director Brian G. Hutton's trap. The $16 million in Nazi gold is really just a MacGuffin. A perfect excuse to strip away the rigid ideals of traditional war films. This movie doesn't celebrate patriotism, it celebrates rebellion. These characters don't fight for flags or nations, they act for themselves. And strangely, the film doesn't punish them for it. Instead, it sends a quiet but provocative message. Following orders is not the same as being moral and blind. Obedience can become a chain. The characters succeed precisely because they dare to ignore the rigid political system and take control of their own fate. When the gold finally appears, what the audience cheers for isn't greed, it's freedom. The gold is just a glittering disguise for something deeper. A bold statement about individual agency in a chaotic world. 16. The Tiger Tanks and a beautiful cinematic lie. In the memories of war movie fans, the German Tiger Tanks are the ultimate terror. A steel monster blocking the path to $16 million in gold. I remember holding my breath as Kelly and his crew tried to take one down fully, believing they were real machines pulled straight from the Nazi arsenal. But it was all a beautifully crafted illusion, shaped by the clever hands of resourceful filmmakers. In reality, by 1969, real Tiger tanks had long vanished from the world, either destroyed or sitting like relics in museums. To solve this problem, the production pulled off one of the most remarkable cosmetic surgeries in film history. They borrowed 3 Soviet T-34 tanks from the Yugoslav army and transformed them into Tiger I tanks. With carefully welded outer shells and camera angles designed to deceive the eye, this Russian-German hybrid marched onto the screen, roaring like a true beast of war. It's a testament to an era when cinema thrived on creativity rather than algorithms. That lie didn't diminish the film. It elevated it, adding to the wild spirit of a crew bold enough to turn the impossible into an enduring icon on the big screen. 15. Donald Sutherland nearly died behind the camera.
You see what's sending out them negative waves, did Moriarty?
Hey, that ain't my fault, Oddball. I've done nothing but have good thoughts about that damn bridge ever since we left.
Behind Oddball's carefree smile and laid-back hippie attitude lies a behind-the-scenes story that feels like a brush with death. While filming in Yugoslavia in 1969, Donald Sutherland suddenly contracted bacterial meningitis, a life-threatening illness that inflames the protective membranes around the brain and spinal cord. His condition became so severe that he slipped into a clinical death state. An urgent telegram was sent to his wife with a chilling message: come immediately, but don't be surprised if he doesn't survive until you arrive. Death stood at Sutherland's doorstep, just as his character was becoming the soul of the film. And yet, through what can only be described as a miracle and timely medical care, he recovered. The production was forced to halt for over 6 weeks while waiting for him to regain his strength. When he returned, Sutherland was visibly thinner, something that explains why Oddball appears noticeably gaunt in certain scenes compared to others. 14. Grenades, personal checks, and brotherhood on a hillside. Some behind-the-scenes stories are even more bizarre than the script itself. And the tale of Donald Sutherland and Clint Eastwood on a Yugoslav hillside is a perfect example. Imagine being in a foreign country filming an intense war movie, only to receive shocking news your wife has been arrested for attempting to buy grenades for the Black Panthers, using a personal check. A level of naivete so absurd, it pulled Sutherland's family into a political storm. It was Clint Eastwood who delivered the news. The sheer absurdity of using a personal check for such a transaction made Eastwood laugh so hard he collapsed to the ground, dragging Sutherland into laughter through tears. What followed was a deeply human moment. Eastwood putting an arm around his co-star, walking him along a hillside overlooking the quiet Yugoslav countryside, promising his support no matter what. In that moment, they were no longer Kelly and Oddball, but two men sharing a genuine bond amid life's chaos. Though Sutherland's marriage would end soon after, that hillside memory remains a quiet symbol of empathy between artists. 13. The quiet rise of a television icon.
See, Miss Booker? Elements of the 321st and 35th? I mean, who's pushing them in there, and where the hell are they?
Well, I don't know, sir.
I'm coming down there, Booker.
When audiences watched General Colt, the loud, arrogant, glory-obsessed officer in Kelly's Heroes, they saw nothing more than a solid supporting performance. Few realized that beneath that uniform was Carroll O'Connor, a man who would reshape American television just 1 year later. At the time of filming in Yugoslavia, O'Connor was still a relatively unknown actor. But the essence of General Colt, his bluntness, his stubbornness, and his underlying prejudices felt like a perfect rehearsal for Archie Bunker in All in the Family. Soon after the film's release, O'Connor exploded into fame, becoming a cultural icon representing the American working class, complete with all its contradictions. Looking back at General Colt today, we can already see the shadow of Archie Bunker forming like a quiet foreshadowing, written by fate itself. Sometimes, even the smallest roles become essential building blocks in an artist's legendary career. 12. Hawkeye and Oddball, two faces of a rebellious spirit. Have you ever felt a strange connection between Hawkeye, the field surgeon in MASH, and Oddball, the eccentric tank commander? That's no coincidence. The moment Donald Sutherland took off the white coat of a wartime surgeon, he carried that same carefree spirit straight onto the turret of a tank in Kelly's Heroes. Different settings, same soul. Both Hawkeye and Oddball are kindred spirits, outsiders who use humour and personal philosophy to push back against the rigid machinery of the military. Sutherland subtly infused that free-spirited, slightly offbeat 1970s energy into a film set in the 1940s. Looking back, these two roles feel like a quiet manifesto. Sutherland asserting the right to be different. Oddball wasn't just a character, he was part of a cultural shift where it became better to be a free-spirited madman than a perfectly obedient cog in the system. 11. Positive waves, born from pure improvisation. If you asked me for the most memorable line in the film, the answer would be negative waves. But here's a nostalgic truth few people know. those iconic lines didn't exist in the original script. They were born entirely from Donald Sutherland's improvisational genius when he decided to fully lean into his character. What sounds like nonsense in the middle of gunfire became the philosophical backbone of the film. Sutherland infused it with the mindset of a true hippie, someone who believed the mind could shape reality even in the middle of a life-or-death battlefield. That improvisation transformed Oddball from a supporting role into the very soul of the movie. 10. The Michelin Guide, when tourism meets the battlefield.
Look, we're not worried about the German army. We got enough troubles of our own. To the right, General Patton. To the left, the British army. To the rear, our own goddamn artillery.
I still remember the scene where Big Joe obsessively searches for the best places to stay in the city of Nancy using a little red book. That wasn't just a random prop, it was the famous Michelin Guide. What seems like a humorous detail is actually rooted in a fascinating historical truth about how Allied forces navigated Europe. In 1944, as the Normandy invasion was being planned, one of the biggest concerns wasn't enemy fire, it was getting lost. Retreating German forces often destroyed or reversed road signs, turning the French countryside into a deadly maze. To solve this, the US government quietly reprinted thousands of copies of the 1939 Michelin Guide, the last edition, before the war began. And so Allied soldiers marched into the liberation of Europe with travel guides in hand. It's not just a funny detail about American practicality. It's a vivid slice of history where the line between military operation and forced tourism blurred in a strangely poetic way. 9. Don Rickles when the king of insults gets serious.
Listen, I got a little favor to ask of you. Will you stop crying? I haven't even asked you yet. The hell's the matter with you?
When people think of Don Rickles, they remember a legendary insult comic, a man who could roast anyone with razor-sharp wit. But in Kelly's Heroes, he surprised everyone by stepping into the role of Crap Game. Gone was the stand-up comedian. In his place was a grounded, gritty and surprisingly human character, a savvy supply operator who understands the value of every gold bar and every bullet. Crap Game isn't just comic relief, he represents pure pragmatism in wartime. Rickles toned down his signature biting humour to create a character with depth, an essential piece in Kelly's plan. Looking back, this role reveals another side of Rickles, a true actor who knew how to use humour not as a weapon, but as a mask for survival. 8. An Ocean's 11 on tank treads.
You mother...
Strip away the uniforms and the World War II backdrop, and you'll realise this is at its core a pure heist movie. It follows the classic formula: assemble the crew, map out the plan, overcome impossible obstacles and pull off the ultimate score. It's like Ocean's 11, but instead of the glittering casinos of Las Vegas, the setting is war-torn villages. And instead of tailored suits, there are mud-covered tanks. The audience isn't chasing a political victory. They're chasing the thrill of watching a group of underdogs outsmart an entire system and claim the reward for themselves. That deliberate tonal clash is what makes the film so unique, where the sounds of war become nothing more than background music for a masterclass performance by a crew of high-stakes players. 7. Vižinada, where cinema becomes living legacy. For fans of Kelly's Heroes, the village of Vižinada in Croatia isn't just a filming location, it's a sacred ground of cinematic memory. This is where the legendary standoff between Kelly's crew and the German Steel Tigers took place, right in front of the bank. Even today, thousands of fans visit walking along the same cobblestone streets to relive the spirit of the 1970 film. But there's a deeper, more haunting layer. The Sherman tanks that roared across the screen weren't hollow props, they were real war machines. Tragically, 20 years after filming ended, those same tanks were pulled back into reality, used in the Croatian War of Independence. The steel actors of the film return to battle now, bearing the scars of real combat. Today, they stand silent in war museums across the country, no longer symbols of cinema, but relics of history. 6. The collapsing bridge, when practical effects ruled.
No, it ain't.
There's one thing everyone agrees on: the bridge demolition scene in Kelly's Heroes is a masterpiece of practical effects. Instead of relying on safe miniatures, the crew chose a far riskier path. They built a real bridge and blew it up for real. It took weeks of intense work from carpenters, engineers and stunt teams. The structure had to be strong enough to support tanks, yet engineered to collapse beautifully and safely the moment the explosives were triggered. When the blast thundered across the river and clouds of dust swallowed the frame, the crew erupted in relief and exhilaration. That shot wasn't just action, it was proof of an era when realism was earned through sweat precision and extraordinary courage. 5. The 35th Division, a small detail with big meaning. Have you ever noticed the Blue Cross insignia on Kelly's shoulder? That wasn't just a random costume design. It identifies Kelly and his men as part of the 35th Infantry Division, a real National Guard unit made up of soldiers from the American Midwest, Missouri, Nebraska, and Kansas. This detail acts like a subtle nod to history. It grounds fictional characters in reality, giving them roots, a homeland, and a clear military identity. Choosing a National Guard division also fits perfectly with the film's tone. These feel less like rigid career soldiers and more like independent, slightly rebellious men focused on survival and opportunity. Kelly's Heroes may lean heavily into entertainment, but it never loses its connection to the real soldiers who lived through the fire of the 1940s. 4. When the Pentagon said no to the rebels. There's an unwritten rule in Hollywood: if you want to make a large-scale war film, you need a nod from the US military. But with Kelly's Heroes, the moment officials read the script, they slammed the door shut. They couldn't accept a film where American soldiers steal gold, defy orders, and treat pragmatism as their guiding principle. The film's anti-authority message was pure poison to those trying to maintain an image of model heroism. That rejection pushed the production to Yugoslavia, a communist country at the time. And ironically, it became a hidden blessing. The Yugoslav People's Army stepped in completely, providing real tanks, real weapons, and vast landscapes still marked by history. 3. An identity crisis at release. The tragedy of Kelly's Heroes began the moment it premiered. The marketing campaign had no clear direction. In some places, it was sold as a pure comedy. In others, it was promoted as a straight-faced war drama. This confusion left audiences and critics in 1970 completely disoriented. Critics didn't know where to place it. They found it too absurd to be a serious war film, yet too bitter to be simple entertainment. But over time, the film stood on its own, defying all labels, reminding us that true masterpieces are often the most misunderstood at birth. 2. Heroes, a title steeped in irony. From the moment the word heroes appears on screen, a subtle deception begins. In the mindset of audiences at the time, heroes meant bravery, sacrifice, and service to one's country. But when you look at Kelly Oddball or Big Joe, you see men who abandon every traditional standard of heroism. They succeed not by following discipline, but by ignoring nearly every rule the military imposes. The irony cuts even deeper when you consider their motives. These are men driven by pure pragmatism, turning war into a personal business deal. The word heroes in the title feels like a smirk from the filmmakers, a quiet jab at hollow ideals. 1. A quiet ending, victory without applause. Most war films end in blazing glory flags, waving music, swelling crowds, embracing their returning heroes. But Kelly's Heroes refuses all of that. When the $1 million heist is complete, the ending arrives quietly, almost anticlimactic. There are no grand speeches, no celebrations, no emotional release in the traditional sense. The characters get what they came for, take the gold, and simply move on. That restraint is the perfect final stroke of the film's message. A triumphant spectacle would have undermined the deeper questions about power and obedience that the story has been building all along. They win, but it's the victory of individuals against a massive system. More than half a century later, Kelly's Heroes still stands as a towering monument that defies every convention of the war genre. It reminds us that sometimes, in the chaos and madness of the world, those labelled as rogues are actually the most clear-minded. They don't chase glory in medals, they chase real value for themselves. And if you feel even a hint of those positive waves like Oddball, or simply love Clint Eastwood's stubborn grit, drop a comment about the scene that stayed with you the most. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss the next cinematic heist.